Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Satchidananda Saraswati, Satchidananda Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati. Vanchitadayini Saraswati, Vanchitadayini Saraswati, Vanchitadayini Saraswati, Vanchitadayini Saraswati, Vacham Devi 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 Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Satchidananda Saraswati.
For a sadhu, the question always arises how to be in a living personal communion with God. And that is why we become sadhus, so that we may have that kind of communion. As long as we don't have communion with God, the mind doesn't feel the true source of nectar, of grace, of inspiration, and it will never be satisfied. Whatever you give it, it will try it, then discard it, and will keep searching for more. It's quite similar to taking a fish out of its natural aquatic environment, out of the water, and then giving it lots of money, comfort, and other material possessions. Delicious food, a car, a high position in society, fame, a good reputation, social connections. But the fish wouldn't be happy with any of it. It would say, I don't want any of this, just put me back in the water. So if you pulled it onto the shore and gave it all those things, in the same way, the soul is like a fish that's been pulled onto the shore. A soul without God, because its natural environment is God, not samsara. That is precisely why there is birth and death. We are born and then we leave. If this were our natural environment, we would never leave it. We would be immortal. We would live in it forever. But this is something we've just glanced into, then we leave and are reborn again. And that is the cycle. But the soul's natural environment is God. And until it returns to its natural environment, it will not be satisfied. This doesn't mean that the soul cannot be on earth in its natural environment. The soul can be, even while in a body on earth, in its natural environment, if it has a living, personal, uninterrupted, and constant communion with God. A certain man in a certain tradition was preparing to take refuge, to accept the creed, so to speak. And a priest or a pastor or a missionary was speaking with him, and he asked, well, how is your spiritual life? You see, accepting God into your heart isn't just a ritual or a symbol of faith. It's about having a personal relationship with God within yourself. The man replied, "Oh, yes, I have a spiritual life. I even saw a house spirit." A true spiritual life is a personal living, communion with God. Then we are a victorious soul, not one that has lost to its mind, its karma, its illusions, its kleshas, but a victorious one. And sadhus must become those who, by having a living personal communion with God, have become such a victor. But you see, this state of victory, this state of personal, constant living communion with God doesn't just come from nowhere. It doesn't just happen on its own. It comes as a result of sadhana. And Shravana is a very simple and joyful sadhana. In the Bhakti Narada Sutras, Narada says, Shravana, Kirtana, Smarana, Vandana, Pada Sevana, and the first is Shravana. Shravana means to listen to the greatness of God. And for us, Shravana means listening to the 8 types of greatness. If we want to have personal communion with God, and our skills in meditation and contemplation are not yet great, then Shravana is a very simple path to liberation, a simple path to enlightenment, is a constantly listening to the 8 types of greatness. And the first type of greatness, the first listening, is listening to the greatness of Brahman, which impeccably leads to the experience of Brahma Ahambhava, unity with Brahman. The second listening is about the greatness of Ishvara Shiva, which leads to Ishvara Pranidhana, devotion to Ishvara, and to Shiva Sayujya, merging with Shiva. And the next method is listening to the greatness of Shakti, her manifestations, which leads to experiencing the power of Shakti and attaining Shakti, comprehending God through the aspect of the manifested as a game, as bliss, Ananda. Next is listening to the greatness of Atman, which leads to the experience of enlightenment, the attainment of jnana. For example, when you listen to the Ribhu Gita, the Avaduta Gita, the Ashtavakra Gita, and the Atma Bodha. The next type of listening is about the greatness of the chosen deity, which leads to attaining unity with our Ishta Devata, and also about the greatness of the Guru Tattva, which leads to the awakening of the inner Sadguru, the attainment of one's own Guru Bhava and Guru Tattva. And the next type of greatness is about the greatness of Sahaja, the natural state, the contemplation of which unites all of this. And so when we listen and practice Shravana about these 7 or 8 types of greatness, this inner personal communion with God gradually awakens within us. To always be imbued with such a living personal communion with God, one must always meditate on the greatness of God and His games. And Shravana is such an external method of meditation. We don't say that Shravana is just listening to lectures or texts. That is too superficial interpretation. Shravana is the union, meditation on the qualities of God through Shruti, sacred texts. Shravana has the root shru. Shru means to hear, meaning not just to listen. For example, a lecture is being read or a text is being read, and what's that happening? We're disconnected in another world, in the state of svapna. That means we are not hearing. But specifically to hear, that is shru. And from this comes shruti, the name for the sacred texts, meaning that which is heard. And in Sanatana Dharma, shruti is considered the most correct way of transmitting information. That is, the information transmitted can be infinitely deep, but perceived could be only according to our abilities. What we were able to hear, and what we were able to hear, that is shruti. What the Rishi was able to hear, and we, through the line of transmission, heard it at our own level. That is shruti. So Shruti is interpreted as heard with the heart, perceived. And so Shravana means not just to listen, but to perceive and listen with the heart. This is the contact. So contact with God begins. And by listening about Brahman, about Ishvara, about Atman, we reveal our own divine nature, our divine identity, Brahma Aham Bhava. And by listening about Shakti, we reveal another aspect, the aspect of divine power, the aspect of divine bliss and divine play. It turns out we can also possess such an aspect because, well, we are also a part of this Shakti. And the Absolute has such an aspect, and revealing within oneself through Shravana, the divine consciousness, divine power, divine bliss, and divine play, this is what makes us free from karma. Therefore, Shravana is an easy way to achieve liberation, together with a bhajan mandala. So Shravana, Kirtana, means you listen and then sing. Sing, listen, sing, and so on. Even if you lack the merits to meditate successfully, to contemplate, or to be an advanced practitioner of the secret mantra or deity practices, listening and singing is very easy. And so over the years, this divine greatness gradually penetrates us, provided that, of course, that we truly hear and that we sing with sincerity. So listening to the greatness of Shakti. Tripura personifies for us all these goddesses, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Parvati, and Durga, as well as their essence, which is Turiya, from which they emanate. This is all Tripura.
Chapter 13. Kama said, O destroyer of fortresses, I will go to fulfill your desire. There is no lie in this. By defeating people with a single hand, I will make them submit to you. Having said this and taken up his bow and arrows, looked furiously at the gods, he went down to earth.
So we just left off where the goddess, in the form of Lakshmi, created Kama, and Kama's task was to somehow convince people to serve the gods. Because the gods were not included in the process, in the cosmic process, they felt abandoned, unsatisfied. They are the subtle energies that control our five sense organs. In other words, people were busy with earthly matters. They had no time for the gods. Their activities were primitive, and they had no concern for anything subtle, pure, or divine, that which is beyond the eyes, ears, nose, and tongue. And the gods are precisely what is beyond. That is, if there are indriyas, karmendriyas, and jnanendriyas, then the gods are the ones who govern the karmendriyas and jnanendriyas. That is the subtle aspect of the ear, the eye, the nose, the tongue, and so on. This means that people live thoughtlessly, crudely, primitively, and their subtle nature, personified by the gods, was left unsatisfied. And people were meant to submit themselves to this subtle divine nature. But the gods felt left out, so they complained to the higher gods. And so Kama was created in the form of a 5-year-old child to somehow encourage people to turn to the subtle, to submit to the gods, to submit to their subtle inner nature, the subtle nature of their senses.
With the colors of lotus stamens, eyes like a blooming lotus, lips like ripe bimba berries, sparkling earrings in his ears, shining with a precious crown, delicate, long-armed, dressed in beautiful yellow clothes, holding a bow in his left hand, an arrow in his right hand, his eyebrows raised in anger, a 5-year-old infant, a feast for the eyes, set off for the middle of the earth.
This is how Cupid is depicted, with a bow and arrows. This is the form he first appeared in, as an infant. And at first they didn't even take him seriously.
Indra, along with his retinue, mounted Airavata to witness Kama's difficult deeds. Holding a vajra, he, along with the other gods, rishis, siddhas, vidyadharas, and kinnaras, watched from the sky, gazing down at Kama on the earth. Then Kama addressed the people with an angry speech. O people, heed my command. Make sacrifices to the gods, to Shakra and the others, or you will be punished by me.
Like a young child, he didn't yet have the skills of diplomacy or persuasion. he decided to act directly. Sometimes we also act very directly in spiritual matters. Although in spiritual matters one must act very delicately, very subtly.
Upon hearing this speech, the people laughed loudly. This is just some infant, busy with children's games. Looking at him, the people said to one another, "Oh, how happy his mother must be to have such a son. He is so beautiful in body and so captivating to the eye. We have never seen such a son on earth. Perhaps he is a king's son. He certainly can't be an ordinary child." To what the people said, the son of Rama replied in a loud voice, "Listen, inhabitants of the earth, you people do not know my nature, me, who has appeared in the form of a youth. I am the son of the one who dwells in the lotus, and I have come at my mother's command to make all of you mortals obey to the ageless gods. Of this, there is no doubt. Answer me without delay." Upon hearing this speech, the people said with a laugh, "Listen, youth, to what we have to say. Why should we obey to the gods? Why shouldn't they obey us? Just as we have no need of them, so they should have no need of us. Go somewhere else. Our king, the Lord of men, Virovrata, who dwells in Brahmavarta, we are his subjects, he is our Lord. We will not obey your commands, for we follow the orders of only one master." At these mortals who spoke thus, the amazingly powerful Kama, his eyes red with anger, cast his net. Word of this spread from ear to ear, and millions of kings arrived with weapons raised. Seeing them, with an angry blazing gaze, he stepped back and knocked an arrow in his bow. Seeing him, the beautiful youth, the kings laughed loudly and spoke words full of arrogance. "O youth, do not perish by your own power, like the patanga bird in a forest fire. You have prepared in vain for your own doom before our wrath, to your mother's sorrow." Hearing such words, stinging like spears, Kama saw nothing, his eyes blinded by anger. Instantly recovering from the swoon of anger, he answered them, "You call me youth in vain. A youth is not one who is young in years, but the opposite. Even a sage can be called a child. So show the strength of your weapons at once. Then, with the power of my own weapon, I will shatter your glory and put an end to your useless talk." Stung by his words, the kings rained their arrows upon him, like rain from a thundercloud. All these arrows fell around him, like thousands of meteors around the moon. Seeing the arrows approaching him, he easily destroyed them all in an instant. He cut each of them into 8 pieces, releasing his weapon. In this he was like the sun, emitting its rays. Seeing this, Shakra and the others exclaimed, "Well done, well done." They showered down a rain of flowers and beat the dundubi drums. Then Kama again released 3 arrows at each of his opponents, leaving nothing but their names. The earth was covered with parts of their bodies, arms, heads, legs, and entrails torn to pieces. The streams of blood there were like streams of hot water, in which hair, sinews, and fingers were like thousands of fish. The many floating skulls were like a festival for the Pishachas. Flocks of vultures and crows among the many broken spears were like gangs of robbers, whose terrifying appearance made the heart tremble at every step. Seeing such amazing power from Kama, Indra and the other immortals proclaimed that their wish had been fulfilled. At that time, crowds of messengers, learning of the kingdom's destruction, set off for Brahmavarta to report to Virovrata. Upon entering the capital, they hastily told the gatekeepers, "Report our arrival to the glorious Maharaja. We have urgent business. Be swift, do not delay." Hearing the messenger's words, the gatekeepers quickly went to their chief and reported. The lord of the gates swiftly went to the Maharaja. Approaching and greeting him, he spoke with his hands folded at his chest. To the king, who sat on the throne, surrounded by his chief counselors, provincial heads, ambassadors from other lands, guards, and captains of the guard, ready to strike down any foe with his sharp swords like a lion on a golden peak. The captain of the guard said, O great king who destroys enemies as the sun dispels the darkness. Messengers have arrived from the north with an important message. If my lord commands them to appear before him, I will grant them that opportunity. Hearing these words from the Lord of the Gates, Vardhana, the chief counselor, said, "Let them pass without delay." At the command of the captain of the guard, the messengers bowed to the king and stood aside. And Vardhana, beloved by the king, said, "O messengers, is all calm in our kingdom? Answer before the king." Hearing this, the messengers said, folding their lotus-like hands, "O Lord, your glory grows with every hour, like the light of your moon. This news has now come from beyond the Lokaloka mountains. On the slopes of the Himalayas, a certain youth has appeared, shining like the sun. He has defeated the northern kings in a great battle. He has captured all the rulers of the lands subordinate to you. He is alone and he is 5 years old, and he is lotus-bodied and lotus-footed. With his own hand, in an hour, he defeated millions of kings. Tell us, O God, what will become of us now?" Hearing this speech, King Virovrata, after thinking, stood up, took his bow and arrows, and headed north. Then the eloquent Vardhana quickly approached and bowed to him, and spoke words like a stream of nectar. "Forgive me, my lord, you yourself are Bhagavan. Goodness follows one whose thoughts align with their actions, while that which is not good is left aside. A king should consult with his counselors about what is happening and about the consequences to come, discerning with his wisdom." Hearing these many requests from his counselor, the Lord of the earth decided to call a council.
In ancient times, the kings were called Raja Rishis, royal sages, those who carry out the will of God while possessing great power. Brahmins and yogis, in contrast to them, were specifically called Brahmarishis, who were considered divine sages, those who embody divine wisdom. Brahmarishis were sages from the Brahmin caste and Rajarishis from the Kshatriya caste. Thus, governance was carried out based on divine principles, on divine laws. In such cases, both were sages. Both performed sadhana, they performed tapasya. Their primary duty was to diligently maintain the sattvic bhava, a state of purity and goodness within society. Sattvic bhava means there is purity, beauty, harmony, love, light, freedom, radiance, balance, and the opportunity for every soul to follow the path of evolution all the way to liberation. The opportunity for every soul, regardless of their karma, to cultivate their inner divinity and attain realization. At the same time, rajas and tamas were not rejected, but were placed in a secondary subordinate position. And they nourished sattvic bhava, serving it like roots nourish a tree so that it may bear fruit. Thus, the balance of the three gunas in the universe, or rather on earth, in human society, civilization, and culture, was maintained by these two types of sages, Raja Rishis and Brahma Rishis. And when the balance of the three gunas was disturbed, for example, when tamas guna or rajas guna increased, earthquakes, wars, natural disasters, and so on would occur. And the king, upon learning that some unrest had begun and battle had started, he realized that the gunas were out of balance and that order needed to be restored. Such an ancient, ideally Vedic balanced society is the social model that we can also apply to ourselves. The role of Brahmarishi is played in us by Buddhi. The role of Raja Rishi is played by Manas, Ahamkara. The role of the subjects is played by the Karmindriyas and Jnanindriyas. And all these inner rishis must ensure that sattva is present within us, that sattva dominates. We do not deny the existence of tamas and rajas, but we establish the supremacy of sattva, its subordination, and maintain balance and proportion. And for a sadhu, it is very important to think in a sattvic way, to act in a sattvic way, to express emotions in a sattvic way, to communicate in a sattvic way, to speak in a sattvic way, so as to be imbued with the spirit of sattva. Sattva should become the working frequency for a sadhu. It is precisely through sattva that God is realized. With sattva, one can have vision, and with sattva, one can contemplate. In sattva, meditation brings success. In rajas, it does not bring success, and even less so in tamas. That is, you can sit for a year, 3 months in retreat, a year in retreat, but if you are in rajas, it's all useless. That's how it will all pass by. Even 12 years could pass, so. In sattva, you can be in retreat for 3 months or 3 hours, and you will enter samadhi. You will experience the state of non-duality, and then you will come out of it, and that experience will stay with you. You will work with it your whole life, and it will bring you grace. That is why it is very important to learn to live in sattva, to think in sattva, to act in sattva, to speak in sattva, to do seva in sattva, to do everything in sattva. Often we think, if only there was some rajas right now, then everything would speed up. We start rushing around, getting frantic, and then everything completely gets out of control. And we end up not having enough time for something. But in sattva, there is clarity that tells you how many hours you need for seva. Get up earlier, arrive earlier, do everything in advance. You'll manage to do everything, arrange this, that, and the other in advance. This clarity allows you to act efficiently. We spend thrice less time. That's why the question is, before you do anything, enter a state of sattva. Before you speak, enter a state of sattva and try to act from sattva. Sattva is the energy suitable for liberation. Liberation is possible from it. From rajas, and even more so from tamas, liberation is impossible. That's why even the gods complained about the asuras. Seeing how the asuras, led by Prahlada, remember this story? So he began to worship Vishnu, that is Eshvara, in the aspect of sattva. They said that those who worship in the aspect of sattva attain liberation in this life. But since when did the asuras start worshipping in the sattva guna? Their nature is rajasic. It's some kind of utterly absurd. It was Prahlada who taught them this. So for a sadhu, sattva is the only appropriate right energy that should be cultivated. That is divine light, divine love, divine harmony. And this balance, when sattva dominates, tamas and rajas are kept under control.
Guruji, the asuras began to worship Vishnu, which means tapasya started to take place. That is, the sadhu began to follow the spiritual path, to follow some method, to gain some wisdom, and in general to subdue his senses. Is this what it means in this context, if we translate it to the level of an individual?
Well, in the inner sense, yes, when the asuric ego decides to turn to the light side. The cultivation of the sadhu leads to the fact that grace, the ability to have personal communion with God, is no longer far off. That is why sadhus always strive to cultivate the sattva within themselves. It's not so important what we do, but in what bhava we do anything. If we act in the right bhava, whatever we do will always be successful, correct, and harmonious.
"50 commanders of the Akshauhini phalanxes arrived there, and Vardhana was appointed as the general over this army. Arriving at the assembly, sparkling with jewels, they took places of honor next to the king. After that, Vardhana said, 'Maharaja, listen carefully to these wise words. A king devoted to the laws of morality will enjoy happiness. This is what I have to say to you. and after careful consideration, you should act having consulted with all your good advisors. Alliance, gift, division, and war are the means of politics. If it is not possible to use any of the previous means, the next one should be applied. Now it is necessary to discuss with the advisors which means to employ. Only after careful deliberation and reaching a conclusion should one act and make decisions in agreement with the advisors. Hearing these words, the king looked into the faces of his advisors. Understanding his intention, each advisor expressed his own opinion. Some said that an alliance was best, others argued that a gift was preferable, while still others spoke in favor of war. After hearing many opinions, the king fell silent and turned his gaze toward Vardhana. Then Vardhana stood up, bowed, and began to speak. "O king, different advisors have spoken differently, each according to their own understanding, and all of this is indeed true according to their natural discernment. When opponents are equal, an alliance is possible. If the other side is stronger, then an alliance with them is impossible unless one unites with another. The fourth option is possible if the previous ones are unsuitable. At present, the situation is such that even the last option is inapplicable. All of them are useless and will not lead to any result. And the last method, if applied, will lead to disaster. After all, this 5-year-old child who has defeated kings acts for the sake of the gods, and therefore his power is greater. His goal is not the kingdom or anything else, and in this case, a gift is not the best option. A gift is possible if the opponent is equal in strength. But this child alone instantly defeated kings numbering in the thousands, which means his power is divine. And naturally, we should not expect a favorable outcome here. Therefore, king, turn to Mahadeva, the wielder of the Pinaka bow, our family deity. He will resolve all your difficulties. Therefore, in my opinion, there is no other way. An equal should fight with an equal or with someone weaker in strength. Therefore, O great king, these are my words according to my understanding. Discuss them in the assembly to decide how you may act successfully. Hearing this opinion of Vardhana, which was the best, all the assembled advisors respectfully said, "This is good, good." Then the king listened to what Vardhana had said, decided to appease Mahadeva, having sought advice from the mouths of Brahmins and the Guru, as is proper. Thus ends chapter 13 of the Tripura Rahasiya, Mahatmya Khanda.
What is meant by people? So the gods, they kind of control the sense organs, right? So what is meant by people in the context of the inner world?
Manas, physical body. Ahamkara,
That is also thoughts?
something that people identify with. When a person considers himself a worldly, atheistic person, he has no connection with the deities, with God, but he completely identifies himself with something. He identifies himself with the body, and in the language of the gods, people are called manavas, those who possess mind, intelligence, or dwell in the mind. And when we are more identified with the body, with the mind, then we are manavas. We belong to the human race. We share the same fate. But when we truly find God within ourselves and go beyond mere identification, we are completely freed from the need to identify ourselves with the human race. We become jnanas. And then, gradually, we transform into some kind of divine being, for example, into a Siddha Vidyadhara, into a Vidyashvara, into a Rishi, into a Deva, and so forth. This is our future.
So suppose when there is a sattvic bhava and it is precisely cultivated, this means that their human nature, consciousness, such people, manavas, have turned toward their highest source. So they have realized they are connected with God, with the Supreme, Is it right? And they have begun to direct their strength and energy there. Conversely, if not, then it means they are focused on satisfying the senses, on the fleeting interests of this life, and so on. In other words, that is tamasic or rajasic direction.
Yes. The gradual accumulation of sattva is indeed the gateway to the heavenly paradise, a truly divine realm. Therefore, a sadhu should strive to accumulate such sattva. Apart from wisdom, non-dual wisdom, the wisdom of contemplation, whatever you may call it, calming the mind, purifying the mind, pacifying the kleshas, all such processes comes down to accumulating sattva within oneself. This is achieved through upasana. It is the guna through which liberation becomes possible. Divine freedom, divine grace become possible. But since we have other gunas, they constantly try to come to the forefront and push sattva aside. And sometimes a person becomes established in love, in awareness, in mindfulness. But something throws them off, provokes them. And at the most inopportune moment, when they were so serene, completely happy and blessed, suddenly something inside them shifts. And once again, tamas or rajas comes to the surface. And he suddenly snaps at someone. This means his sattva has taken a back seat, and his rajas or tamas has come to the forefront. He couldn't handle the situation with appropriate means. He had to invoke the inner gods of tamas and rajas. But when we have sattva, we can handle all of life's situations. And why is sattva so important? It's important not for its own sake, but because it provides a constant personal connection with God. Whereas rajas and tamas at first don't provide that at all. At higher stages, when we rise above the gunas, we stop depending on sattva as such in our view and contemplation, but we still depend on it on the level of energy. But an uninterrupted connection with God is maintained in any state, even in tamas and in rajas, but it just manifests differently.
Is it possible to consciously manifest rajasic energies? For example, to have a conversation with someone, so to say, on their language?
With people when they're being bothersome?
No, not with people. I mean, in general, if like...
A sadhu?
Yes, if such energies do occur, or maybe other beings.
A sadhu cannot, only sattvic energies.
I see, only sattvic. And if it's controlled, like...
Controlled? Well, controlled things are very unstable.
Or some beings that are quite bothersome, say, during a period of meditation.
It's not a simple question. To put it this way, if a greedy spirit threatens you, show even greater greed. If it's a lustful spirit, show even more lust. If it's an angry spirit, show even greater anger. The methods of subduing in the Siddhas tradition are like that. Yes, but it's better not to experiment because, there's a saying among actors, sometimes the mask sticks to your face. That is, an actor plays their character for so long that they forget who they really are, whether they're the hero of their movie or just a person. In the same way, we might want to display rajas, and then it could become our habit and second nature. We need to firmly hold on to sattva. And rajas and tamas are just impurities added to the basic primary state of sattva. If you feel like, I hardly have any sattva at all, how am I supposed to live? What should I do? You need to make an effort to cultivate it, to generate it. That is, we can generate any kind of energy. We can shift the proportions of the gunas. We can generate it if we give the mind the right direction, if we want to, if we work on ourselves in this, practicing sadhana.
Guruji, what about sadness and a state of sorrow, the sense of impermanence that comes from realizing the four awarenesses? Is it a state of sattva?
It is the fruit of a retreat on the four awarenesses. It can be, and this is certainly a particular fruit that leads to vairagya, but you really shouldn't stay in it for too long.
So if something happens to you, you think it's all pointless anyway. Do whatever you want to me.
This is a certain realization of vairagya. It means that some stage of vairagya has come. But this doesn't mean you should use and settle into this energy of sadness and constantly walk around in such sadness. You need to look for sattva within it. Within any negative emotion, you need to look for sattva. That is, it is for the sake of sattva. This sadness, it is for the sake of sattva. It is needed in order to detach from this world, from its energies, and to desire divine love, to desire divine wisdom, purity, and beauty, and all that is majestic. Within any energy, there is sattva. And when we feel that some kleshas are stirring inside us, we should remember that there is sattva within this, and I will try to look for it. To seek sattva means to seek God. Because when you find sattva, you are connected with God. Sattva feels God. It is the guna in which all gods and siddhas reside. They do not choose to live in tamas or rajas. That is the choice of demons, asuras, bhutas, pishachas, and rakshasas. Nagas are full of tamas, full of rajas, and they are separated from God. They are, so to speak, not God's own children from the perspective of their own perception. But sattva allows one to feel God. And this ability to feel God is very important for us. It is very important for us to hear the voice of God, not to fall out of it. That is why you can equate sattva with abiding in God. Even though it's not that simple, at this level, that's how it is. And often when something is wrong, we should tell ourselves, sattva is more precious. I must cultivate sattva. Maybe something happened that we don't like at all. We must overcome and manifest purity, breadth, beauty, harmony, tolerance, and greatness. And do this many times. And even when we are provoked by certain situations, we still must humble ourselves. No matter how much situations provoke us, our spiritual vigilance should be such that we remain in sattva, manifest sattva, and hold on to sattva. Because for us right now, this is equivalent to being with God, to not losing our connection with God. It's very important. More precious than all the money, more precious than all the power, all the mystical abilities is to remain connected with God. Everything else is meaningless if the soul loses its connection with God. It has been striving for this for thousands of lifetimes.
Guruji, I wanted to talk about the feeling of sadness when things don't go your way. Sometimes it's like...
Good, first of all. First of all, it's good. It indicates that you are freeing yourself from karma, and this sadness is the sadness of the ego. And you should say to this, well, that's exactly where you belong. After all, I decided to separate from you.
I wanted to say that in ordinary situations, when everything is fine, it's hard to notice what you need to work on. But when such situations arise, God is directly showing you, so work on this. And you can see some kind of lesson in this and switch your focus to work on a particular sadhana.
That's right. God is working with you.
And you remember, once again, God wants to tell me something. I need to work on this.
That's right. And mainly, what does God want to tell us? How can we overcome the problems of our karma? That is His message to us. But we have to hear it, we have to understand it. We must be attentive enough to hear His message.
Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Satchidananda Saraswati, Satchidananda Saraswati, Sadguru Rupini Saraswati, Sadguru Sa